For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Batend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we talk to leaders of the cannabis community, everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. Curbside pickup of cannabis may be exposing both customers and patients to unnecessary risk of robbery. 28 of 32 states with legal cannabis have implemented some form of curbside pickup options for cannabis dispensaries. But my guest today says there's a lack of guidance when it comes to what's required of businesses in terms of security. Today, I'm talking with Ken Wolf of Ken Wolf Security Consulting. Ken's company helps dispensaries get licensed by working them through the process and helping them craft the security plan, which in most cases is required in order to get licensed in the first place. We'll get into why Ken is concerned, what he thinks can be done about it, and why he's calling on both dispensary owners and police officers to do more. Ken, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So I guess this is going to be kind of the oversimple statement of the century, but cannabis dispensaries really are enticing targets for potential robberies, which makes them somewhat dangerous places. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. They are a prime target in normal times, but in the age of COVID and kind of this tense, violent atmosphere tone that's being set from the very top of our government, and the fact that mask wearing is the norm, you've got a lot of factors that are really combining to make it even more dangerous.
And so you just mentioned a couple of them, but let's kind of break that down into a couple of categories. I think already cannabis, it's been talked about a lot as a high volume cash business, which often can't work with banks. There's a lot of money on hand, not to mention it's an expensive product. The thing that the store is selling itself is valuable. But, you mentioned how coronavirus is making it more dangerous. What are some of the specific ways that that danger is heightened for retailers? Well,
if there's one message that I could get across in this in this interview, I would say is I want to sound the alarm about the fact that 28 of the 32 states that have cannabis programs are offering curbside, which is great and convenient, but they're offering it without any security protocols. So that is the main message I'd like to deliver is we have people have to step up. Dispensary owners, local police departments, we must get together and put security plans in place, because security plans for dispensaries in every state, although they vary, they're all built around the internal experience of going into a dispensary. So this is a whole new climate, and nobody's addressing this, even when we've had since the beginning of COVID. During the early months in March, I think it was, Denver had a serial armed robber. He hit 5 places, was finally caught, wearing the mask, which helped. And then, we'll probably talk about it more. But the very sad situation in Oakland, where a female was shot and killed at a dispensary in the lobby. And yet I think it was part of the same day or within the same 24 hours in Oklahoma, another shootout where a female bud tender was critically injured. So what I'd like to just underscore is that we have to connect these dots and realize this is a national problem for all of us in the cannabis industry.
I kind of want to break down what you're saying there, or shine a light a little bit on one specific aspect of what you just said, which, if I understand correctly, security plans as they exist right now encompass what happens inside the dispensary, because that's routinely where these transactions have taken place. Is it that the dispensaries think that their responsibility ends at the front door?
They do have outside cameras, but they're really not designed for high resolution coverage of the parking lots themselves. So the short answer to your question is yes. The vast majority of the security protocols and procedures and systems are all about the inside. And then, the only exception would be sort of the cameras that are on the outside. Some states like Massachusetts, which you'll hear me refer to the gold standard in terms of security requirements, you have to actually approach a kiosk, show your ID, and then you're buzzed in to what we call a man port or a man trap or sally port, where you're still contained in the bulletproof booth to be buzzing once again it's determined that you are a patient and not somebody armed or dangerous.
How do customers in Massachusetts feel about that?
Oh, I think they're fine. I think I serve on the Massachusetts Patient Advocacy Alliance, and so we are very close with the patient community. And the patients deserve the highest level of quality, and I don't think it interferes at all with in terms of service. I think it actually expedites service when you have a very thorough multi-layered security system, from cameras to intrusion alarms to motion detectors to keypads and controlled door access. You have so many layers. That's all to protect the patient and the providers.
So circling back to the idea that the current security plans perhaps don't go far enough, obviously with the extension of curbside programs, as you mentioned, in 28 of 32 states, that obviously does mean that people are operating outside of their normal environment. And I can imagine some of the security issues that come up with that. But why don't you tell us, what are some of the specific issues that you've identified when it comes to curbside pickup? I understand that your firm actually has created a video that shows some of the potential vulnerabilities to both employees and patients or customers. Mm-hmm. Would you mind kind of walking us through some of the things that you found?
Absolutely. So the video, which by the way we obtained, we didn't produce this. This is a real transaction that we were able to obtain. So it begins with basically, this is a form of a strip mall, which is very common here in Florida. So you have a patient that appears to be in a parking lot that definitely is not under, if it's picked up by a camera, it's not going to be high resolution, number one. And you see in the video, the patient has a pile of cash. In fact, there's a $100 bill and a bunch of 20s sitting in her lap. And we could point out, that's like vulnerability number one. And then the gentleman from the dispensary does come out, I think the bud tender, but by himself, no security person with him, no body cam, really no protection except for the mask, which of course he needs to wear. And what he does is he confirms with her what her order is, and then goes back in and leaves her again back out in the car, vulnerable, a sitting duck, in my opinion. So he comes back out, provides the product, which is again would be very tempting to an armed robber, who at this point, if you're an armed robber, you could get the product, the order, which is probably worth a couple $100, and then you could get all the cash as well. That's all sitting right there, in the open, without really any security protocols. So the actual whole length of this transaction is about 10 minutes from beginning to end. And it's 10 minutes of full vulnerability. The patient is not protected in any way that I could see, except for possibly a camera remotely picking up a little bit of the car that she's in, and it's not in front of the dispensary; it's further out.
Yeah, and so it sounds like there are a number of things already just like you said in this basic example. Do you know, when it comes to some of the dispensaries that your company has worked with, are there any policies about how dispensary workers are identifying themselves? Obviously, there's going to be some sort of uniform in most cases, right? So customers should know who's approaching their car.
Yeah, hey, you beat me on that one. I missed that. Yeah, in this case, actually, you'll see it. But either way, somebody could get hold of a T-shirt. There's no ID on. It would be nice for the representative from the dispensary to have an actual ID around his neck, so that he could reassure the patient that, hey, okay, this is who I am, and so good catch. You should go into security. It's interesting to me here because it does sound like everybody involved feels like this is a routine every day. They sound like they're at ease and not particularly high alert. Well, then I would ask them to see another video, which unfortunately has gone viral and just breaks my heart. And that's the viral video of the Oakland shooting last week, where again, a number of protocols are violated. And unfortunately, the full length video that's online does show being shot, cowering in a corner, and ultimately falling over and dying. So, this is deadly serious stuff. Yeah. When it comes to the situation in Oakland, what are some of the things that you mentioned, some violations or things that didn't go correctly? What were some of the things that you noticed about that situation? Oh, there's a lot in the Oakland circumstance. So what was happening? This was basically closing time. It was around 10 p.m. So basically, they probably let the last few patients and customers in, lock the door. And then the video pretty much starts with a security guard or manager. I don't know, because he is not in uniform. But basically, it shows him unlocking the door and then sticking his head out. Just so, it's a real quick. So right there, before he even did that, a proper site that's properly secure would have the cameras to basically surveil the entire area, and see if there's somebody hanging around. And when you watch, if anyone watches this video of the Oakland shooting, it's clear that the robber is very close to the door, very, very close to the door. So that door should never have been opened in the first place. And I know a lot of this it's easy to be, hindsight is 2020, and to be a, armchair, analyst, but I say this only because I want to prevent this from happening again, and I say it from the perspective of what we have in the guidelines in Massachusetts, which would never have allowed. The standard procedure would have been to do a full video check of the entire premises. All the cameras. If there's anything suspicious, then you hold out. You know what? In this case, I believe if they had the proper cameras, they would have seen this suspicious person who was apparently very close to the door. And most police departments, they want you to call and report. I mean, you're a dispensary, you're closing after a busy day. You've got probably, $100,000 in cash and product. And, it's a very dangerous situation. And you have 4 patients that that are being let out of the dispensary. So I think most police departments would welcome, hey, just want to let you know we're closing. There's a guy hanging around the front door. Want to make you aware of it. Most police departments would say, you know what, let's just send somebody over and check it out. That's the thing you do. But as you see in that video, what happens is he peeks out. He does a very, quick look. He didn't really fully scan. Really ideally what he would do is go out himself and survey the whole parking lot with his eyes only after he did the video, making sure the video was the closed circuit TV showed that it was clear, then doing it with his own eyeballs, then letting the patients go out. But instead, he basically does this quick little peek and then just opens the door and the patients are filing out. Every one of those 4 patients, guess what they are doing as they are walking out?
What's that? Looking at their phones?
They're looking at their phones. Hey, I'm telling you, they are all glued to their phones, every one of them. So another message, if I could underscore, please be aware of your surroundings, especially when it is a potentially dangerous situation, because they walk out like sitting ducks. They walk out. They're all now in front of the store, and you can see the first thing you see is the security guard grab his gun, which in of itself would be not again when we make policies and procedures for dispensaries. That is not what we've done. Obviously, he sees the suspicious character. He grabs the gun from his back, and everybody runs back in. Now, at that point, I would say everybody on using our SOP, everybody would be asked to just lay down on the ground, face down, do not make eye contact, and tell the burglar, hopefully burglar is not a robber. Robber is usually armed, means that they're armed. Hey, take what you want. It's all yours. We're not going to look at you. We're not going to ID you. The money is there in that corner. The cannabis is here. That all could be replaced. Dispensaries have insurance. But instead, what happens is the robber chases them into the lobby. They run into the lobby. The robber's the last one to enter. And I'm trying to reach out to the police department because I want to confirm this. But it appears the security guard is pointing the gun at the robber. So at that point, you have an escalation. And we really try to teach de-escalation. I was a volunteer reserve police officer in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Seriously, it was very progressive, and it's all about de-escalation. So that by pulling out that firearm, you're escalating the situation. So at this point, the robber opens fire because he has a gun pointed at him. He shoots. He has a high magazine gun, so he's firing bullets everywhere, and this young woman gets hit. You see her getting hit. You see her fall into the corner behind the door, shaking and cowering, and also the security guard got hit as well. I think he fortunately has survived. I think he's in critical condition, but has survived. So, there we have a lot of problems. If you're a robber and you're looking for money, there's only essential businesses are open. So it is the most tempting target in the COVID age, and you could walk in with a total, a full mask on and not be red flagged in that regard.
It's a really, really good point. So I want to ask you a little bit more about, in general, who these security guards are, and when it comes to security companies, like how they're staffing. But before we move on from the potential vulnerability of Curbside, as far as with any dispensaries, and I understand that it's going to be different by state, but you do operate in multiple states. Mm-hmm. Have any of them perhaps been a good example of how they've included Curbside in their security plan going forward?
Great question. And I kind of went back and looked before this interview to confirm. So basically all these dispensaries are operating under executive orders by the governor. Now in California, you have the 540 municipalities that could kind of have their own wrinkles. But when I looked through these executive orders, I saw a little bit of language in Massachusetts about, trying to extend some of the protocols that you have inside. But even Massachusetts was pretty weak. Essentially, no. The short answer is no. They do. These states are not providing guidance. They're just saying you're allowed to operate curbside, and go for it. Try to be safe, and it's open ended like that.
And you mentioned that this has been a concern for you for some time. Have you had conversations with dispensaries? Like, what has their response been to you? Does it end at, well, we're not required to, or do they understand the potential risk that they're putting kind of everybody in?
Yeah. Well, the ones I work with, I would not work with a dispensary that does not kind of buy into our company's philosophy. And at Ken Wolf Consulting, we have some core principles. One of them is absolutely protection of the patient, and the staff. Yes, the dispensaries I am working with are following our direction. But I'm a small business, so I can't say that's much comfort in terms of I don't represent, for instance, any MSOs. So there's no guidelines that are going through an MSO and hitting many multiple states and multiple locations.
In general, who are the kinds of people who end up working in cannabis security?
Well, I think it's these are for-profit businesses, and so they're looking to, as better than me, bud tenders, the whole trimmers, everybody is being squeezed in terms of the salaries, and the same applies to security. So I think on the security staffing, you're not seeing people with tremendous experience. I think you're almost, it's pretty much at minimum wage.
And what kind of training is that vary by state, by company? Who determines what training is required to be a security guard?
Well, a lot of states do mandate that the employees are trained. I know Missouri tried to. They're the latest to come on to roll out. They're rolling out right now this month, and I was happy to see that they mandated ongoing training, initial training, and ongoing training of security procedures. So that happens, but that is not uniform. I don't see that in Florida's regulations. I do not see it in some other states. Oklahoma, for instance, is where I just pulled up Oklahoma and saw that there's been a total of 4 robberies in the past 4 weeks. So, that kind of correlates with lack of guidance and lack of rules and regulations. What it does benefit is if you're a dispensary owner who is looking to maximize profit. And I'm not saying that's the case with all dispensary owners, but we're talking about, it's not even a cost issue. It's just a matter of a philosophy of investing in your people, knowing that you could replace your stash or your product, your tinctures, whatever is stolen could be replaced. Concentrates, whatever. Let them take the friggin' brownies. Massachusetts, we have cannabis. We have cannabis pizza at some sites. If they want to take the pizzas to go, that's fine. But that's really the most important thing, that's the type of ownership groups that we work with that know that that's going to come first.
And so, touching back on something that you said earlier, the situation in Oakland, in your estimation, was it a mistake for that security guard to escalate the situation by drawing his weapon? Like, at the stores that you work with, is the operating procedure to just, don't confront? Absolutely.
What I'm seeing in these, what we're seeing across the country, I mentioned Oklahoma, but we saw it in Denver, and in California, is people coming in with assault rifles. So no, you're not going to engage in a gun battle. I don't know any dispensary that's armed that has assault rifles, but our philosophy is total de-escalation. I actually recommend that they don't even have that our guards don't be armed for that reason. So you don't have that risk. It's the same old thing, where the majority of people that have guns at home, which I do, but and everyone has the right to. But unfortunately, the statistics show that them or their family members end up being shot more often than a criminal. So that's a whole other issue that we're not going to get into in terms of gun reform. But no, I do believe that our standard procedure at all our dispensaries is zero resistance. I don't even want you looking at the guy's eyes, because right there alone, you're getting a description. You just protect yourself, get on the ground, look the other way, and let them get what they need. I do want to say that all of our dispensaries, and most states require it, do have duress alarms. So, we say if you could hit the alarm, and usually we have it in a place that is going to be very easy to hit the duress alarm, that's fine. But I also want to make sure I work closely with the police departments. I don't want to have a hostage situation either. So in the communities I work, the police know that if there's a duress alarm, we don't want you coming with sirens. These are very wise police departments, and we've walked through what do we do when we have an armed robbery. The worst thing that could happen is you end up having a hostage situation. So our police in our communities, they will respond as what we call, no lights, no siren, usually in many cases unmarked cars. I don't want to give away my trade secrets, but I do use GPS. So for my police departments, we just tell them, hey, the guy is now on, Apple Street and Fifth, and let them approach in a way that they know how to, so they don't get shot either, or somebody in the public walking their dog.
So wait, I'm sorry. How exactly does the GPS tracking work? You're able to follow. Well, you can't go into exactly detail here, but you're saying you would be able to track a potential perp.
Yes.
From a location. That's really interesting.
Without going into detail, yes. And the reason I have that is I believe, sure, we want the guy apprehended, the man or woman that's committing a crime. We want them apprehended, but not at the expense of a life. So let them get in and out of the dispensary, and then the technology, which I'll just leave at what I've said, we will be able to ultimately find that person. Guaranteed. Yeah.
Are there instances where you've ever worked with police officers to do that, to catch a perp or something like that, or track somebody who had? You really have? Okay.
Yes, I have experience. Yeah, I have experience. Actually, I've done some work in the jewelry industry, which has a lot of similarities. If you've been to a high-end jewelry store where they have to buzz you in. So, yeah, we use this technology. We absolutely have had multiple apprehensions using this technology.
Business owners and some advocates within the cannabis industry have made the argument that, considering the amount of tax, in some states it's as high as 35% on cannabis products, that perhaps states have a responsibility to provide additional protection and support through their police departments. Are you sympathetic to that argument? Do you think that police are doing enough? What's your assessment there?
I'm absolutely agree with that. But I will say it has to be a partnership. I agree that the police departments could do more, and I'm familiar that Oakland, for instance, only has one officer. They have over 150 cannabis sites, and one police officer assigned for, investigations. So that's understaffing, unfortunately. But I think it has to be a partnership. I think the ownership of these dispensaries have to step up too. I think they all need to say, hey, you know what, this curbside is not going to go away. This is going to be the norm. I mean, first of all, we're going to have COVID around for quite a while, clearly. And curbside patients deserve the convenience of it. But we also, every owner needs to look at their security system and audit it to be appropriate in the COVID era. And that's something that I offer to anyone, any dispensary. I offer, a free audit.
Yeah. So actually, two questions on that front. We are seeing condemnation of the way that police departments across the country have sometimes conducted themselves when it comes to use of force. Considering that you're advocating this de-escalation and really measured approach to confrontation, I'm just curious. I understand that you're an ex-police officer yourself.
Volunteer reserve officer. Yes.
Understood. So, I mean, it's helpful anyway, because you have, I think, some insight into the actual functioning of how the job looks. But I guess what I'm wondering is, like, you talked about all of the things you've done to, protect against a armed robbery situation turning into a hostage situation. Do you think that dispensaries want police officers outside, and what does that conversation look like, given that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way we approach it, it's legitimate for dispensaries to consider cost. So a detailed officer, ranges from $70 to up to $100 an hour. Whereas you could have a properly trained security officer there that's, and for really almost half the cost. And, and maybe it may reassure some people, but I think a lot of other people also might feel not comfortable with it. So,
sure.
Yeah.
There is a trend kind of across the country of former police officers starting their own security companies and working specifically in cannabis, which I think is unique and notable for a number of reasons. But do you think that other security companies share your assessment that de-escalation is the way to go in these situations? And when it comes to working with former police officers that become security guards, are there conversations that you have to have about, how this job is different?
Yeah. You're right. It's an absolute trend. Everybody, most police officers will hit their pension at 20 years. And then, somebody that's started at 25, they're starting to collect a pension at 45, and then they could go and be the director of security at a cannabis firm. But I go back to the point, well, what's this person's background? Just because you're a law enforcement officer, do you understand the cannabis community? Do you understand the special needs of working, which in many cases are working with patients who have special needs? So I think the security firms that do best, and there was one that was interviewed on your colleague's show, that firms like that gentleman and like mine. You want to look for firms that have worked in this unique environment. I have a history of working in the cannabis community. I'm going to really date myself here, but I was part of the effort, the prop in the 90s to get California to get the exemption during the AIDS epidemic, so that we could get patients medical cannabis primarily for wasting syndrome. I'd like to see more diversity in the hiring, and not just diversity in the protected classes, but also in the like I said, people that have a connection to the community. And there's a lot of cases, like you said, this is a big trend now. So everybody wants to jump in it. I call it like a gold rush, and when you have a gold rush, you attract all sorts of characters. So I think people have to be real judicious. I think it's the right thing to do for your patients and your customers, to have somebody that is going to be comfortable. For instance, I also helped run an opiate addiction clinic, so I understand what it's like, working with patients that are dealing with addiction. I don't know how many police officers are going to be comfortable in that regard. Believe me, there's some very unique issues that come up when you're dealing with addiction. And especially the opiate crisis, which is another thing that has rebounded and compounded the risk of life in the COVID era, is that we were doing so well on slowly bringing down, at least New England, especially where I'm most familiar, And now opiate is the addictions and the overdoses are spiking again. So anyway, so I do believe I don't believe every officer who retires is the right officer to be the security director for a dispensary.
I think that people have a tendency to view security guards as some sort of an authority figure, perhaps, and because they're armed, there's like a different kind of interaction.
Right.
I guess I'm wondering if they're not armed and they're not necessarily there to combat an assailant, what's their role?
Well, their role is prevention. There is a lot of work behind the scenes for a security officer to do. My security designs have these man traps that are bulletproof. I also want to point out, by the way, I do have a client that has chosen armed. I don't rule out armed if the client wants to go with armed. I just want to make sure that they understand, only in the to absolutely save that person's life, because the rule for law enforcement is if you pull out your gun, you're pulling out your gun to kill. You're not pulling out your gun to shoot somebody in the leg, which you can't do, which is most cops can't do. You got to be a sharpshooter. So it is very unlikely that you're going to have to pull out that gun. It can happen, and you should be trained for it. But the technology is there to really have a focus on prevention, and that's the results I've had so far. Fortunately, thank God, and with my clients.
So one last question for you, Ken. You mentioned earlier some things that patients can do. What do you see as like the immediate steps forward that both dispensaries and individual customers could do to make their shopping experience safer?
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of what I just described as the rules for our security guards really apply, I think, for a patient or customer, beginning with being aware of their surroundings. Now, they don't have a 360 dome camera above their head, but, please put down the phone if you're walking into a dispensary or a bank or a jewelry store. Be aware of your surroundings, especially if it's a compounded situation where it's nighttime, you're by yourself. Just try to avoid making yourself a target. Now, the video that we dissected a little bit on the Curbside, this woman had a couple $100, right? You could see, just sitting on her lap. I think sitting, pretty elevated too. It's very easy to see it, and don't put yourself in that situation. These are all crimes of opportunity. So if you could take away the opportunity, it's really worth it. I mean, there's nothing more traumatizing than having a gun pointed at you.
Ken Wolf is the president and CEO of Ken Wolf Cannabis Consulting. Ken, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Thank you,
Jesse. I really enjoyed our discussion.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground@TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. The High Ground is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Batend. Thank you for listening.